What is going on with all of this violence at daycares? I feel like I'm seeing so many more stories these days in the news of a baby or a 3-year-old being unalived by daycare workers. There are 2 stories that have stood out recently. So let's go over one of them. Headline is horrific. 3-year-old boy died at daycare after being physically held down for nap time, lawsuit says. This happened in Park Hills, Missouri, about 65 miles south of St. Louis. It happened on May 16th at Poppy's Playhouse 2. Family members identify the boy as 3-year-old Conrad Wade Ashcraft. They say he was autistic and nonverbal. The family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Poppy's Playhouse 2. The family says Conrad had only been attending the daycare for a few weeks. According to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's investigation, staff member Tiffany Hedrick took Conrad to the hallway during nap time because he was crying and whining. She allegedly lay Conrad on his back and tucked the sides of his personal blanket under his body, trapping his arms. But Conrad kept wiggling, so Hedrick then allegedly turned him over onto his stomach. Hedrick also allegedly put an 18.2-pound weighted blanket over Conrad's body, as well as over half of his face, to try to get him to sleep. When he still wouldn't stop moving, Hedrick allegedly placed her legs over Conrad's body to physically hold him down until he stopped and she believed he was asleep. Conrad was not checked on again by any staff members because they all believed he had fallen asleep, a letter from the DESE reads. Hedrick left for the day before Conrad's mom came to pick him up. DESE says he was stiff, cold, and his leg was purple. Conrad's aunt, Lacey Hardy, said the family is devastated. She said he was the absolute sweetest and beautiful nonverbal autistic 3-year-old. He was a son, brother, grandson, nephew, and cousin to several people who loved him so very much. Sorry, but this is why the death penalty exists. I think anyone who abuses and unalives children is a monster, intentionally so, is a monster who has lost his or her privilege to live in a civilized society. There's another story here that is almost as bad. Let's take a look. The headline here is just in: Bainbridge, Georgia daycare worker arrested on child abuse charges, which reportedly happened on the first day. She's currently out on $44,000 bond. Her name is Yvette Thurston, 54 years old, employee of Little Blessings Childcare. She's been arrested on aggravated battery and child abuse charges. Corey Weeks, the child's father, shared images of his son on social media and with the news. It was a little boy's first day of daycare. Look at this boy. Look at this boy's face. Are you seriously telling me that that woman who did this to him deserves to live in civilized society? What are we doing here? Letting her out on $44,000 bond? What kind of society are we if we are not doing our best to protect the most vulnerable, babies and children? What is wrong? What is wrong with us? What is wrong with this country? That woman should at the very least be rotting in jail, although my preference is something much more permanent be done to send a message that we will not tolerate the abuse of young, innocent children. Here's another story. Here's a headline from the Daily Mail. I'm sick of this little bee. Daycare worker admits killing 8-month-old girl by suffocating her with a blanket after complaining she wouldn't sleep as CCTV shows dying child thrashing legs to escape. This is why the D penalty exists. This is what it's for. Particularly heinous crimes. I'm so done pretending like you can rehabilitate these monsters into a normal civilized society. These people do not belong in civilized society. And we all know, let's just say what everyone's thinking, we all know that if the races were reversed in any of these cases, there would be riots in the streets. You would have another George Floyd epidemic happening. There would be looting of all these stores, and politicians would come forward, and all the idiot celebrities, Steve Carell and Pink, would come forward to donate millions of dollars to the family. But all of these stories get tucked away very quietly and very perfectly because, the colors are wrong in this one. But if it were reversed, it would be national news. What is happening? What's happening with these the daycare incidents of violence, and even worse, the unalivings? I was curious. I got on Google, and then I also asked ChatGPT. I was like, has there been an increase in daycare violence in recent years? No, there's been no And the answer was no, there's been nothing to say that there's an increased number of these cases happening. You just may think that you are seeing more of it because it's more in headline news. I don't know what the statistics are. We don't really know. It's too early to say, especially we're not all the way done with 2025. Who knows? Maybe we are just seeing more of it. But I do know this, none of this should be tolerated in the least amount. And there's something very unique happening with American daycare. And, there are other countries that have been quite similar. And I've been talking to a lot of people who live in Australia, for example. They've been seeing a lot more cases of violence in daycare. And they've actually been trying to do a little bit more in countries like Australia to prevent things like this. The government's getting involved, etc. What is it? What is it about American daycare that this seems to be happening all over the news? And I think there's a lot here that we can talk about. And a big piece of it is that we're allowing people to take care of children who don't have the right experience, who sometimes have zero experience at all, and who are not properly supervised. I mean, the amount of money that these people get paid, you have like a minimum wage workers coming in and they're just trying to pay their bills. They don't care about the kids. They have no education or experience working with kids. And there are so many daycares popping up today because there is a cultural significance here that compels a lot of families to put their kids into daycare. There's a cultural component and there is an economic component. I think it's actually more worthy of our time to talk about the cultural forces. Of course, there is an economic factor where things are getting more expensive than ever. So a lot of these families have to have both parents work in order to pay the bills. I used to think that was the majority of daycare cases, but to be honest, I mean, I think the inverse is starting to be true. I think the majority of people who send their kids to daycare are doing it more out of ego because they want to have the vacations and they want to make the money to put into the 401k and have the nicer cars and have the nicer house, etc. And so what they're doing is they would rather have the mother work and they would still have a big chunk of that paycheck go to the daycare, but at least they profit a little bit and they use that money to live life more comfortably. And I do think that there is, of course, there are families who are struggling financially and they have to have both the parents work just to make ends meet. But I'm starting to think that is a minority of the cases of daycare families. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback in the comments here, but I really think, I'm starting to think that a lot of these parents, two-parent homes who put their kids into daycare, I think there are a lot of these cases where the mother could stay home, but probably just doesn't want to. And I know that's a horrible thing to say. People are going to get mad at me. And then you're going to have the dum-dums who are like, well, why can't the dad stay home? I do not buy into this idea that men and women are exactly the same and that they're interchangeable. They're not interchangeable because men are not women and women are not men. So of course, when it comes to young children, an 8-month-old, a 3-year-old, of course, young children need their mother more than their father, especially home with them, taking care of them. Like, let's not pretend as if men and women are exactly the same. Because if you believe that they're interchangeable in the context of childcare and certain types of parenting, then you believe that men and women are essentially the same. And we're not the same. I like this tweet from Mega. She says, instead of coming up with excuses for the significant psychological, emotional, and physical dangers of daycare, let's try to address the cultural forces that compel many families to use them at all. And I do think that there are significant cultural forces. I think they're embedded in us at a very, very young age. We are pushed into college. I mean, the narrative is starting to change a little bit, which is nice, but we're all told from a young age, you got to go to college, you got to get an education, then you got to go get a career. And then the women, you can't let pregnancy and motherhood stop you from achieving all of your professional dreams, right? If you have a baby too young, you're going to ruin your career. You're going to ruin your professional dreams, and it's not worth it. Having a baby sucks the soul out of you. These are the messages that we were told from a young age. And some of you listening, if you're women, maybe you can tell me in the comments, were you also told this from a young age? Because I was, a lot of us were. Like, we were just expected to say that becoming pregnant and having a child is going to be the thing to derail your career, and it's not worth it. So a lot of moms, when they do get pregnant, they're like, all right, well, I got to keep my career going. There is a cultural force that that really sort of demeans the idea of a woman, a mother, a wife staying at home to raise the kids. It's looked at this as this sort of like lesser than, it's not looked at as a high value when it comes to a family or a mother or parenthood. It's not something that is revered as incredibly important. It's just not anymore. And you could spend a whole episode, you could spend an entire hour plus multiple hours talking about extensive research showing that young children, especially under the ages of 3 to 5 and under, they do much better in life, emotionally, physically, mentally, if their mothers raised them when they were younger, if their mothers were the primary caretakers and caregivers from a young age. You can't deny all of this research that points to that. But, this isn't one of those things that you don't even really need research for. Obviously, biologically, we are designed to give birth to our children. And there are so many things in the first few years of our children's lives that connect us to them in ways that cannot be replaced by a father or a babysitter or a daycare worker. And I think that our culture would do a lot better to finally admit that. Here's another good tweet from Big Titty Warlord. One of my most trad-tarded takes is I think it's absolutely insane to leave an infant with a random strange daycare professional, especially a rotation. When Zoran talks about free childcare for all, I always wonder what that would look like. DMV quality infant care sounds scary. Yes, you have a lot of these politicians, leftist, communist, openly communist politicians like Zoran, who talk about essentially free childcare from a young age. And parents, all they hear is, a free place I can drop off my kids. I don't have to pay $3,000 a month for. Sign me up. That sounds awesome. I want free childcare. What do you think free childcare is going to look like? Do you enjoy your trip to the DMV? Do you enjoy going to the post office? Do you enjoy these state-run facilities? Like, do you have a good interaction with all these employees? Do you really think that they're going to be hiring people with extensive experience with children, with the right education to take care of children? Like, what on earth do you think free infant care is going to be like? I mean, if you have this kind of infant care happening at private facilities, what on earth do you think some sort of socialist program of free daycare is going to look like? I mean, honestly, I think some people have completely lost their minds when they hear these things. This free childcare, first of all, there's no such thing as free. It means they're going to raise everyone's taxes and it's going to come from the government. Government-run state-funded childcare sounds like an absolute nightmare. And I just want to share some messages. I talked about this on my Instagram and I got quite a few messages from women who have worked in daycares before. So here's one of my followers. She said I could share this anonymously. She says, I tell every parent I know to never put their kids in daycare. I worked in it for 10 years and would never trust their hiring process. The teachers are trained to be mandated reporters, but none of my reports would make it past the director. I found out years after working there that the director threw a child against the wall, witnessed by other teachers, and despite the FBI being called in for it, every teacher that had witnessed it lied for her. I'd have coworkers come in high all the time, saw teachers screaming in the faces of kids. It's a horror show. We were a 5-star accredited daycare. Here's another one. I worked at a daycare for about 3 months and I taught alongside a woman who thought she was a man in front of a room full of 12 to 20-month-olds. She would essentially target a few boys and express how jealous she was of them or just obsess over them, and it really creeped me out. She would complain about her body or talk about her medications in front of the kids, and eventually I was scared to go to work every morning. The other women who worked there were unhinged as well. I've never seen women be so cruel and mean to literal babies. I will never send my future babies to a daycare because of my experience. Another one. I worked at a daycare center in a church, mind you, where a coworker left a child on the playground by himself. A couple other coworkers were under investigation for some sort of abuse toward a child. Not sure all the details. Another coworker came in drunk, and that same coworker was having sex with our center's director at the daycare. They would lock the office door and have sex during the day at our Christian church daycare. This is only a few examples. I could go on and on and on. Okay, this is the last one we'll share. 100% agree. I worked at a daycare too and was disgusted at the way it was run, the people who were hired and how little you get paid, while the directors are soaking all the money coming in. I'm so against putting your kids in one. On top of the food and snacks they feed the children, junk food, and again, they're driving their luxury vehicles. The director was morbidly obese and her husband really gave off creeper vibes. I hated that job and it did not end well. I told them what a joke they were and peaced out, and they definitely got money from the state. I know you can tell me, oh, these are just anecdotes, Gina. It's all anecdotal. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I probably got tens, maybe like 50 to 70 messages from people who worked in daycares before. And I've heard stories like this many, many, many years ago. Many years ago. There's something wrong with the hiring process and the way that they conduct these centers. They're not hiring the right people. And even these 5-star accredited daycares, you really don't know what they're doing to your kids at the end of the day. And in this country, because culturally we do not value children the way that we should, of course that's going to result in most daycare centers that do not hire the proper caregivers. Of course, if you don't value kids as literally the most precious things in our society, why on earth would you have a robust hiring process? Why would you put in all the time and energy and money to make sure that you have an impeccable staff, hire people who have the right education, hire people who have the right experience? We don't value kids. Our culture as a whole, for the most part, does not value children the way that we should. And look, I'm not one of those people that's like, women should never, ever work. I'm not one of those people, but I do think that we need to set up women for success, for realistic success. And I think we need to tell women at a young age, if you want to have kids and if you want to be a present mother, you're going to have to really consider the fact that you will have to take a break from your career to raise them full time, because this is a really hard truth that nobody likes to admit. You cannot be a full-time employee and a full-time mom. Something has to give, not because you're a bad person, but because you are human. You can't do both things full time. One of them ends up having to be part-time, because if you're somebody who works full-time and you have a robust career, you're spending most of your hours outside of the home away from your children. And especially when they're young, like 5 and under, that's the most important time for you to raise them, for you to shape them, for you to protect them. And if you're not home most of the time, you're not there full time. And we have to be honest with young women. This is not about shaming women. It's not about like putting women down. It's really about presenting a very realistic future for women who know that they want to become moms. Because being a mom really is, as cliche as it sounds, is the most important job in the world. What's that quote? The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. The way that we raise our kids has the biggest impact on our society above anything else that we could do. Truly, that's how it is. And I think that we should be honest with women. And I honestly think that we need to prepare more women to go into the type of professions or develop a type of skill that can be done part-time from home if they still want to or need to work when they have kids. Like I know a lot of moms, they work part-time, maybe even just like 5 to 10 hours a week. They work part-time, whether it's helping assist their husband with their family business or they have some sort of trade or things that they sell. Things to still bring in some income while they have kids so they can be present for their children. And that's their number one priority. And they can still bring in a little bit of income if their family needs it or if their family wants it. And I think we have to be more honest with women about that instead of selling this absolute lie that you can have it all. Nobody can have it all. Nobody can have it all because we're human. There are not enough hours in the day. There are finite things that we can do. Our abilities are finite. You cannot have it all, especially not at the same time. So I think we need to be much more honest with women about the fact that if you want to have kids and really mother them, raise your own children, you're going to have to prepare to at least take a break from a full-time, robust career. And you know what? The great thing is, if you want to send your kids to a good school one day when they're older, 8, 9, 10, they're going to be in school most of the day at that point, especially when they're even older, like preteens and teens. You can revisit your career if you want to. There's a lot more freedom after they're younger. That's just my 2 cents. And I know it's a really touchy subject because we are also in a time financially where it's harder than ever to live on one income. I absolutely acknowledge that. So of course there is a financial factor. I'm not discounting that. They're not mutually exclusive. It's certainly a factor that it's harder than ever in this economy to live on one income. It's harder than ever. So that is something that we need to be talking about honestly. And I do think that there's a lot that our government can do to help make this country more economically viable for families who want to live on one income. But we need to get rid of these monsters around kids. That's step number 1. Okay, I have no mercy should be shown to these monsters. I'm sorry. I'm sure many of you can at least agree with that. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Do you guys have experience with daycare, maybe working in a daycare or sending your kids to daycare? I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.